Hello everyone, my name is the Storyteller, and today I will share with you some horror stories to help you fall asleep. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. But before that, write down in the comments from where you are listening this and what time it is. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss upcoming horror stories. Gorilla in the City, a horror story. Chapter 1: The Night He Got Out. The rain hammered the metal rooftops of the Metropolitan Wildlife Center like 1,000 broken drums. It was past closing hours. The hallways were silent, the lights dim, and the only sounds were distant murmurs of animals and the occasional flicker of emergency exit bulbs struggling against the storm. In the primate wing, security guard Eddie Holtz walked his usual midnight route, sipping cold coffee he no longer tasted. He'd been working nights for 19 years, and the only things that ever changed were the animals and the paycheck. His flashlight beam slid past the barred cages and plexiglass enclosures, occasionally catching the glint of a bored eye or the twitch of a tail. But then something was different. The largest habitat, Goliath's enclosure, was dark. Goliath was the crown jewel of the zoo, a 610-pound silverback gorilla captured after a controversial expedition in the Congo. Larger, stronger, and more violent than any primate the zoo had ever housed. He was known for his intelligence, rumored to understand far more than he should. Eddie stopped. The power console beside the habitat flickered erratically, sparking, before going completely black. He tapped the glass. "Goliath, big guy, you awake?" Silence. He shined the flashlight inside and froze. The enclosure wasn't just empty. It was destroyed. Shattered glass lay everywhere. Metal beams were bent like soft clay. Deep claw marks ran across the floor and walls. Whatever had happened here hadn't been quiet, yet somehow no one had heard a thing. Eddie's radio crackled. "Central to Wing 3, status check." Eddie swallowed hard and pressed the button. "We have a situation. Goliath is missing. Repeat, Goliath is." The radio cut out. Every emergency light died. The hallway plunged into darkness. Eddie heard breathing behind him. Heavy breathing. Wet breathing. He slowly turned, and something massive lunged from the shadows. Eddie never finished screaming. Chapter 2: The First SIG. Morning arrived unaware of the horror that had begun. New York City moved as it always did. Honking taxi cabs, rumbling subway trains, street vendors screaming for attention, millions walking shoulder to shoulder without looking at each other. At 7:42 a.m., the first sighting came from a sanitation worker named Linda Reyes. She was clearing trash bags on West 58th when she saw movement near a pile of construction debris. Something large, crouched, breathing heavily. At first she thought it was a dog or maybe a homeless person wrapped in blankets. Then it stood up. A massive silhouette, nearly 7 feet tall, gray matted fur dripping rainwater, shoulders wide enough to eclipse the scaffolding lights behind it. Linda dropped her bag and ran, but not before the creature turned its head and looked right at her. Intelligent eyes, human eyes, full of recognition and rage. She later told police, "It looked at me like it knew my face, like it would remember it." The NYPD dismissed the report at first. Sensationalized eyewitness accounts were daily occurrences in the city. But then 911 calls started flooding in. "Something huge just knocked over a taxi. My delivery truck was hit. Something big like an animal. I heard screaming. Someone got dragged into an alley." Every call described the same thing. A giant ape. The zoo remained silent. Managers and PR teams rushed to control information. If the public knew Goliath was loose in the city, lawsuits and national outrage would follow. So they covered it up. But Goliath was already hunting. Chapter 3: Blood on Broadway. At 8:55 a.m., A group of early commuters waited outside the Broadway 7th Avenue subway entrance. A busker played acoustic guitar while tourists checked their phones and office workers rushed to finish breakfast sandwiches before descending into the tunnels. A woman's scream cut through the air. Someone pointed to the rooftop of the adjacent building. At first, no one believed what they were seeing. City dwellers were conditioned to look for the most rational explanation. But there was nothing rational about a 600-pound gorilla leaping from a 10-story roof. As Goliath hit the pavement, the ground shook. Glass shattered. People fell. He grabbed the nearest man, a banker named Michael Clark, and smashed him against a bus stop sign so hard the pole bent in half. Panic erupted. People shoved and trampled each other, desperately trying to escape. Cars swerved onto sidewalks. Storefront windows shattered as terrified crowds forced themselves inside for cover. Goliath roared, a deep, primal explosion of sound that made skin crawl and bones vibrate. Then he disappeared into the subway entrance. The screams from below echoed for minutes. By the time police arrived, it was a slaughterhouse. Blood smeared across tile walls. Footprints the size of dinner plates. Twisted metal bars ripped from the turnstiles. A single security camera flickered, showing Goliath walking deeper into the tunnels, dragging something behind him. Something still moving. Chapter 4. Meet Dr. Evelyn Ward. While chaos spread across Manhattan, a helicopter landed on the roof of the Department of Wildlife and Urban Safety. Emerging from it was Dr. Evelyn Ward, lead primatologist on the original Congo expedition that had captured Goliath. She was the only one who truly understood the gorilla. Tall, sharp-eyed, with streaks of silver hair despite only being 43, she walked with the brittle confidence of someone who had carried too many mistakes for too long. A team of officials met her, pale and sweating. "Doctor, thank God you're here," said Deputy Commissioner Lionel Grant. "We need your insight immediately." Evelyn didn't waste time with niceties. "Start talking. How long has he been loose?" Grant swallowed. Best estimate 10 to 12 hours. Too long, Evelyn thought. She followed them into a war room conference space, where photos and reports were already pinned to boards. Crushed taxi hoods. 2 mangled bodies under white sheets. Abandoned subway tunnels streaked with blood. She spoke without looking up. "He's not hunting at random." Grant blinked. "What does that mean?" Goliath understands cities. He studied people every day of his captivity. He watched routines, patterns, weaknesses. He doesn't want escape. She turned to face them. "He wants revenge." A young officer scoffed. "You're telling us this thing is planning." Evelyn leaned over the table, eyes hard. "Goliath learned faster than any gorilla I've ever seen. He recognizes faces. He remembers who hurt him. And worst of all, he associates everyone in New York with his imprisonment." Grant looked shaken. "So what do we do?" Evelyn exhaled. "We find him before nightfall." "Why nightfall?" another official asked. Evelyn's face darkened. "Because gorillas are 9 times stronger than a man in broad daylight, but at night, in the dark." She let the silence finish for her. Chapter 5. The Monster on the Platform. Subway Line C was shut down within the hour. NYPD tactical units moved into the tunnels armed with rifles, tranquilizer guns, and industrial floodlights powered by portable generators. Captain Morrow and his men advanced cautiously through the abandoned station. Their flashlights cut thin, nervous beams into the darkness. Something moved in the distance. A faint scrape. A heavy breath. Morrow raised his fist and his men froze. "Thermal." A technician checked the handheld screen. "Reading something huge." They advanced, the sound of dripping water echoing like slow footsteps from the ceiling. Then they reached the platform. The sight made several officers gag. The bodies of commuters had been arranged, not scattered, arranged, as if displayed, as if Goliath wanted them to be seen. 8 corpses sat upright against the wall, heads drooping, arms positioned almost respectfully. A message, a warning. One officer whispered, "What kind of animal would do this?" Before anyone could answer, the lights cut out. Every generator died at the same time. Men cursed, clutched rifles, screamed for backup. Then the roaring started, everywhere at once, bouncing off the tile, impossible to locate. A massive shape barreled out of the black, grabbed one officer and vanished again. Bones cracked. Something was thrown across the room. Muzzle flashes lit the space for half-seconds at a time. Screams. Blood. The sound of teeth ripping. And in the chaos, Captain Morrow finally saw it. 2 red eyes staring at him from total darkness. Then Goliath charged. Chapter 6, Survivor of the Tunnel. Captain Morrow woke up face down on cold tile, ears ringing, vision blurry. The platform was silent now. No gunfire, no screaming, no roaring. Just dripping water and the distant rumble of passing trains on other lines. He tried to move his arm, realized it was broken. Pain flared through his ribs, probably cracked too. He forced himself upright. The rest of his unit, gone. Blood-smeared walls, shattered weapons lay on the ground, and bodies, or what was left of them, were scattered across the platform. But not all. Many were missing, dragged away. Goliath had taken them. Morrow coughed, tasting iron. He grabbed a still-functioning flashlight, trembling as its beam fell across something scratched into the tiles in jagged lines. Deep, powerful gouges. Not cages again. It wasn't handwriting. It was chloriding, scraped letters carved into the floor with raw strength. But they were unmistakable. The giant gorilla wasn't just acting on instinct. He had a message. Heavy footsteps echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Morrow turned, panic rising. But instead of Goliath, a figure with a helmet and tactical vest appeared. Captain Morrow. It was a second NYPD squad, late to the scene. They ran to him, horrified at the carnage. "Where is it? Where did it go?" Morrow swallowed. "Into the tunnels with our men." He stared into the darkness. And he knows how to hide. Chapter 7, The Zoo's Secret. Back at the Wildlife Center, Dr. Evelyn Ward confronted the zoo director, Dr. Roland Mayer, red-faced, sweating, desperate. "You lied to the city," she said. "You lied to everyone. You told them Goliath was safely contained. You knew he was." Mayer wrung his hands. He was becoming increasingly hostile, Evelyn. "You saw the reports." "I saw that he was depressed," she corrected. "He wasn't violent, he was suffering." Mayer snapped. "He killed a keeper." Evelyn glared. "He killed a man who beat him with an electric prod. You buried that detail." Mayer said nothing. Evelyn stepped closer. "You didn't want negative press. You didn't want donors pulling funding. So you hid his condition and kept pushing him." Mayer swallowed. "We were close to a breakthrough. Medication was beginning to calm him." Evelyn's stare could have cut glass. "You were drugging him like a lab rat. You tortured him for 6 years and expected him not to break." Mayer slammed a folder on the desk. "He wasn't supposed to escape. We reinforced the enclosure, Evelyn opened the folder. Inside was something far worse. A behavioral intelligence report showing that Goliath's IQ had tested significantly above standard primates. Pattern recognition, memorization, emotional recall, all off the charts. He had studied human behavior. He had learned planning. And for months, he had pretended to be subdued while secretly plotting a breakout. Evelyn whispered, "You kept this secret even from me." Mayer looked away. In the wrong hands, those results could destroy the institution. Evelyn closed the folder with an icy calm. That's exactly what Goliath intends to do. Chapter 8: A City Goes to War. Word finally leaked to the press. Not from officials, not from the zoo, but from a terrified subway sanitation worker who had photographed a mangled platform and posted it online before anyone could confiscate his phone. Within 30 minutes, New York City was in meltdown. News anchors yelled over each other. Panic footage went viral. Rumors spread faster than facts. Is the city under lockdown? Are we being attacked by something? Why is the government lying? Mayor Holloway appeared for a press conference, sweat beading down his face despite the cameras. At this time, we urge citizens to remain calm. This is not a terrorist threat. A reporter shouted, "Is it true that a giant gorilla is loose in Manhattan?" The mayor hesitated, and in that single second of silence, the room erupted. Cameras flashed, questions flew, chaos swallowed the briefing. New York police, National Guard, and state emergency forces mobilized within the hour. Roadblocks sprang up across Midtown. Helicopters armed with searchlights crisscrossed the skyline. Snipers took positions on rooftops. But New York was a jungle of stone, full of shadows, crawl spaces, subway passages, abandoned buildings, storm drains. And somewhere in that labyrinth, Goliath moved like he had been born to hunt there. Chapter 9: First Contact. Dr. Evelyn Ward descended into the subway with a tactical escort. She insisted, no, demanded, to be the first to see where Goliath had gone. Captain Morrow was waiting, bandaged but standing. His eyes were empty. "You shouldn't be down here," he said. "I'm the only one who understands him," she replied. Morrow pointed his flashlight down the tunnel. "He didn't kill all of my men immediately. Some he," Morrow swallowed, "took." Evelyn's heart squeezed. To a gorilla, territory was sacred. In nature, trespassers were punished, sometimes displayed. She feared the worst. They moved down the tracks, floodlights illuminating every gruesome detail. Blood-smeared walls, crushed helmets, cracked rifles. Then they found it. A service alcove, small door ajar. Inside, 2 missing officers sat hunched against the wall, still alive, but badly injured. Bones broken, uniforms shredded, breathing shallow. On the wall beside them, scratched letters gouged deep. "Cages are cruel." Evelyn touched the marks gently. Morrow whispered, "This is rage." Something inside him finally snapped. "No," Evelyn said softly, shaking her head. "This is grief." Before Morrow could question her, something clattered from far deeper in the tunnels. A rock sliding, a heavy shift of weight. Evelyn stepped forward, while the officers raised rifles. Something moved in the distance. A shadow the size of a small truck. Evelyn lifted the flashlight, and Goliath stepped into the beam. Scarred, massive, breathing slow and heavy, eyes intelligent and burning with betrayal. The tactical team tried to raise their rifles, but Evelyn shouted, "No!" Goliath's eyes fixed on her. Recognition. And something else. "Hurt," Evelyn whispered. "I'm sorry." For a second, the entire tunnel went silent. Then, a subway train roared through a cross-tunnel nearby, screeching loudly. Goliath snapped his head toward the sound. And then he charged. Chapter 10: The Dead of Central Park. A young couple walked through Central Park after midnight, taking a shortcut home after a late movie. They whispered and laughed, unaware that the city was spiraling into hysteria only a few blocks away. They stopped near a stone bridge, kissing in the soft glow of a street lamp. Branches cracked. A sound like breathing drifted from behind the tree line. The boyfriend froze. "Did you hear that?" More crackling, something heavy shifting in the foliage. The movement was low at first, almost crawling. Then it rose, higher, higher. Leaves parted, and the couple finally saw two huge eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The boyfriend tried to shout run, but something massive barreled out of the shadows and snatched him by the spine. He didn't even get a second scream. He was lifted, slammed against a tree so hard bark exploded into splinters. The girlfriend ran for her life, barefoot, slipping on wet grass, tears streaking down her face. She reached the pedestrian walkway, only to find police tape and two officers guarding the path. One shouted, "Ma'am, stop, what's?" A roar cut the night in half. The officers drew weapons, flashlights shaking. The girl sobbed. "It's a gorilla. He killed him. He's coming." The police called for backup. But deep in the trees behind them, the footsteps were already getting closer. Much closer. And louder. And human screams began to spread through Central Park like wildfire. Chapter 11. The Ape That RMMBRD. Goliath barreled through the tunnels, each step shaking dust from the ceiling. But he wasn't running blindly. He moved with purpose, memory guiding every twist and turn. He had spent 6 years studying the maze of human pathways, air ducts, service tunnels, access doors, blind spots. He knew the city now. He also knew faces. And as he ran, flashes hit him like lightning bolts. A zookeeper laughing while sprinkling sedative on his food. A scientist shocking him when he refused to move. A child tapping on glass for hours while parents filmed. Hundreds staring at him as if he were furniture, not alive. The memory wasn't just pain. It was humiliation. He had been the biggest animal in the zoo, yet powerless, trapped, a spectacle for crowds. Now he was loose, and he remembered every face. He reached an old maintenance chamber and slowed. Moonlight filtered through a metal grate overhead. He crouched into the faint glow, breathing hard. Blood stained his chest, not his own. He wasn't killing for food. He was making a point. His chest rose, fell. Then he did something no scientist had ever taught him. He thought. He planned. And then he began to climb up the iron ladder toward the streets of Manhattan once more. Tonight was far from over. Chapter 12. Evelyn's Guilt. Dr. Evelyn Ward sat in the back of an NYPD command van, staring at a handheld screen, playing security footage of Goliath in his last months at the zoo. Footage no one had shown her before. Video 1. A caretaker prodded Goliath through the bars with a shock rod when he did not move fast enough, laughing with a coworker off camera. Video 2. Visitors banged on the glass while taking phone videos. Goliath covered his ears, rocking back and forth. A handler threw a bucket at him to get him to face the crowd. Video 3. Goliath sat in a corner, eyes damp, not moving for 8 straight hours. Evelyn's hands shook. She whispered to Detective Harris beside her. He wasn't an animal, he was a prisoner. Harris, a hardened cop with a decade on the force, looked at the screen and exhaled. You think he knows what he's doing? Evelyn nodded. He's not just lashing out. Goliath is assigning responsibility. Every attack so far, zoo workers, police officers, people in authority, the ones he associates with control. Harris swallowed. What about civilians, that couple in the park? Evelyn's voice went quiet. When prey runs, predators chase. Fear is a trigger. Harris leaned back. So how do we stop something that's strong, smart, and angry? Evelyn stared at the floor. We don't kill him. Harris looked at her like she was insane. We try to reach him. Chapter 13. Night of the ROFTOPS. Midtown Manhattan became a war zone. Search helicopters combed the skyline. Spotlight beams crisscrossed rooftops, darting between water towers and ventilation stacks. Sirens cried from every direction, and armored personnel carriers rolled through intersections. Rooftop snipers scanned thermal images. But the city wasn't built for hunting something that could climb like a spider and leap like a tank. At 2:12 a.m., a surveillance helicopter picked up something moving on the roof of a 27-story apartment building. Movement detected, heat signature massive. The pilot banked left. His spotlight lit the roof. Just as Goliath rose to full height, roaring directly into the camera, he hurled a broken HVAC unit straight at the chopper's rotor. The helicopter jolted violently. Mayday, mayday. The machine spun, clipped a rooftop sign, and crashed into a parking structure below in a storm of metal and flame. People on the street screamed and ran. Across the skyline, more figures rushed into position. Snipers prepared to fire. Sharp cracks echoed as bullets whipped through the air. Goliath didn't flee. He charged. Sniper 1 never saw him coming. The gorilla's arm swung like a wrecking ball, smashing the rifle and throwing the sniper 10 feet through the air. Sniper 2 tried to draw a sidearm, but Goliath grabbed him by the leg and flung him off the roof like garbage. He vanished over the edge, falling into darkness. The last surviving sniper crawled, begging into his radio. He's too fast, he's too fast. The radio burst into static. Goliath had dropped onto the rooftop behind him. The screen went blank. Chapter 14, Pressure Boils. At City Hall, panic ruled the night. The mayor stood white-faced at the head of a crisis council meeting. The National Guard wants permission to use live artillery, an aide reported. On Manhattan, another shouted, "Are they insane?" Mass civilian casualties, someone else added. "We can't, not yet." A general leaned over the table. "With respect, we are outmatched. This thing has killed police, special units, civilians, and tactical snipers. If we don't escalate, we lose New York." The mayor rubbed his eyes. "We can't level the city to stop one animal." The general leaned closer. "Sir, it is not an animal." Silence. Finally, the mayor turned to Evelyn Ward, who had been brought in as the lone voice of reason. "Doctor, can you give us a psychological profile?" Evelyn spoke softly. "He is traumatized, betrayed, highly intelligent, and he doesn't trust humans anymore." Council members exchanged uneasy looks. The mayor cleared his throat. "So how do we stop him?" Evelyn hesitated. "We have to show him we aren't his enemy." The room erupted. "That's naive. He's killed over 24. We're not negotiating with a 600-pound murderer." The mayor slammed a fist down. "Enough." Silence fell. He looked at Evelyn. "You truly believe he can be reached?" She nodded slowly. "If we don't try, he won't stop, ever." The mayor exhaled. "Then do it." Chapter 15, Goliath Sees the Sky. Goliath crouched atop a skyscraper overlooking Manhattan. The wind whipped through his fur, carrying the smell of glass, smoke, gasoline, and rain. He looked at the city with hate, but also confusion. He had seen New Yorkers run. He had heard them scream. He had watched soldiers fire at him from rooftops and windows. Were all of them his captors? All of them guilty? A distant memory surfaced, one from the Congo, before humans, before cages. Sunlight through leaves. Water rushing through river stones. The sound of his mother humming. Warmth, peace. Then gunfire, nets, engines, panic. The last thing he saw of his mother was her eyes as she fell. He closed his fist until the steel roof dented beneath him. Humans had taken everything. Now he was taking it back. Below, searchlights scanned rooftops, helicopters buzzed, sirens wailed. Goliath stood, chest rising as he beat it once, thunder echoing across the skyline. Then he leapt, landing on the next building in a crash of concrete. New York's nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 16: The Mother's Appeal. At dawn, the city was gray and tremoring from exhaustion. The sirens never stopped, the helicopters never rested, and emergency broadcasts ran endlessly. Shelter indoors, avoid rooftops, stay away from Central Park and subway systems. Inside an emergency broadcast studio, a woman named Carla DeVero sat in front of the cameras. She was not a politician, a soldier, or a scientist. She was a mother. Her son, a zookeeper's assistant, had been killed the first night during Goliath's escape. And yet she was there, not to demand vengeance, but something else entirely. He wasn't a monster, she said, voice shaking. He was treated like one. She described the mistreatment she'd overheard her son talk about: the electric baton, the sedatives, the forced displays for tourists. She wiped her eyes. My son always said Goliath was lonely, angry, hurt. I am heartbroken, but I am not blind. Silence. Camera lights flickered softly. Carla looked straight into the lens. You hurt something long enough, it will learn to hurt back. Her message spread across TV, radio, and online channels faster than emergency updates. And for the first time since the nightmare began, some people stopped screaming. Some started thinking. Chapter 17: The Plan to Reach HIM. Dr. Evelyn Ward gathered a small team in the basement of an abandoned service building near Central Park. Command had given her only a thin sliver of time and authorization. If we cannot make contact within 2 hours, the guard will move to lethal force. Evelyn frowned. Killing him will not solve anything. He will fight until the last breath. Detective Harris, double-checking a flak vest, replied. And he'll take half the city with him if we can't reason with him. Evelyn picked up a weathered leather pouch, the one she had taken to the Congo expedition years ago. Inside, she carried the most primitive tool of peace. Fruit. Bananas, mangoes, berries. The foods Goliath once ate while living with his troop. Comfort food, memory food. The officers exchanged doubtful looks. Harris raised an eyebrow. You want to offer him snacks? Evelyn met his gaze steadily. Apes remember kindness as powerfully as pain. She checked the tranquilizer rifle slung across her shoulder. Not aimed at Goliath, but at any soldier who fired before she had a chance. She exhaled slowly. We go into the park, we find him, we make him listen. And if he does, Harris asked quietly. Evelyn closed the pouch. Then New York will burn. Chapter 18: Blood in the Fog. A thick morning fog settled low across Central Park, muffling sound and turning every tree into a dark silhouette. Emergency units swept the paths, armed and terrified. Somewhere in the mist, a patrol officer named Ruiz heard something rustle behind a bench. Sweat trickled down his neck. He aimed his flashlight and called out. Hello, NYPD, identify yourself. Something huge moved. Ruiz froze. A massive hand appeared from the fog and closed around his torso. He screamed, but the scream never carried. Goliath hoisted him up, tossed him against a tree, and moved past before the body hit the ground. Not stopping, not feeding, not toying. Just eliminating obstacles. He had a destination in mind. He reached a small clearing, one he remembered from years before his capture, a place where he used to rest with his troop. His mother had groomed him there while he was small enough to rest in her arms. Now he stood alone. A gust of wind shook leaves loose. They fluttered around him like pieces of the past. For a moment, he stopped. For the first time in 2 days. He didn't hear screams. Just fog, trees, the memory of what life should have been. He knelt, and for a flicker of a heartbeat, he was not a monster. He was a son who wanted home. Chapter 19. Revelation of the Alpha. Evelyn and Harris moved through the fog with flashlights off. Lights would draw attention. Noise would be death. Thermal, Harris whispered. Evelyn checked the small handheld scanner. A massive heat signature glowed ahead. "He's close," she whispered. They crouched behind a ridge of rocks and slowly peeked over. And there he was. Goliath knelt in the grass like a mourning god, broad shoulders lowered, head bowed, breathing deep and rumbling. His fur stained with dried blood, his muscles trembling beneath the weight of exhaustion and memory. Harris whispered, "He looks tired." Evelyn nodded. Tired of being at war. Her throat tightened. "I should have protected him." She stepped out from behind the rocks, ignoring Harris's frantic hand grabbing air behind her. Goliath's head lifted. He tensed. Massive fists dug into the ground. Harris pulled his weapon. But Goliath didn't charge. He just stared at Evelyn, the one human face he remembered not with hatred, but with familiarity. She gently placed the pouch on the grass. Bananas rolled out. Goliath blinked. He remembered. The Congo. The girl in the field camp who fed him, while researchers argued under lantern light. He grunted softly, not aggressive questioning. Evelyn whispered, "You're not alone, Goliath." For the first time since the escape. He hesitated. Chapter 20. Misfire. Evelyn slowly raised her hand, fingers spread, palm open. A universal primate gesture. "I mean no harm." Goliath's muscles loosened fractionally. His breathing slowed. His gaze softened just enough to be non-lethal. Harris whispered into his radio, "Hold fire, hold fire." But elsewhere in the fog, not everyone got the message. A nervous National Guard private, barely 20, heard movement and panicked. His hands shook. His sergeant shouted for him to stand down. But fear overcame training. The rifle cracked. The bullet struck Goliath in the shoulder. He roared, louder than anything yet, so loud birds exploded from treetops and nearby windows shattered. Harris cursed. "No, who fired?" Evelyn screamed, "Stop, hold fire." But it was too late. Goliath, in pain and betrayal once again, locked eyes with her. Something inside him broke. The chance was gone. He charged. Evelyn barely dove aside as 600 pounds of fury smashed through the clearing, uprooting trees, howling with wounded rage. Harris grabbed her and pulled her to cover. "You said we could reach him," he shouted. Evelyn trembled. "We almost did." But almost wasn't enough. Goliath was loose again. And now he wasn't just angry. He was hurt. Hurt guerrillas don't run. They destroy. Chapter 21. The Mayor's Plan. The mayor of New York was not used to being powerless. When hurricanes threatened, he called FEMA. When riots sparked, he sent police. But now he was faced with something that could not be negotiated with, could not be reasoned with. A massive, enraged silverback gorilla tearing through the city, with a trail of destruction that grew by the hour. He stood in the underground bunker beneath City Hall, screens lit up around him. Live feeds showed collapsed buildings, overturned cars, and emergency vehicles struggling to break through blocked streets. Marcus was heading toward Midtown, and the military had been deployed at last. "We can't contain him within city limits," the head of National Guard said. "We need authorization for lethal force." The mayor swallowed. If this had been a regular guerrilla, perhaps that decision would already have been made. But Marcus was more than that. Huge, intelligent, unpredictable, almost unnatural. "No," the mayor ordered. "Not yet. We need to evacuate civilians before we start dropping artillery on him." "Sir," the general replied, Civilians are dying in the hundreds already. The mayor looked at the screens again. Smoke, fires, collapsing brick, screams echoing through speakers. He finally spoke. If there's no other way, we take him down. The order felt like a stone on his heart. Chapter 22, The Hunt begins. The National Guard rolled out with tanks, mounted machine guns, and armored trucks. Helicopters swept between buildings, spotlight beams stabbing through the smoke and night fog. Snipers took positions on rooftops. Their target, one massive gorilla moving through Midtown like a force of nature. Marcus turned a corner near Times Square and roared, a deafening blast that made windows explode outward. Searchlights caught his frame, immense and muscular, covered in dust and blood. The soldiers opened fire. Dozens of rounds tore through the air. Marcus staggered as bullets hit his shoulders and side, but instead of collapsing, he slammed both fists into the pavement, cracking concrete. He grabbed a passing taxi and flung it into the air. It smashed into a military truck, detonating in flames. The soldiers scattered. Helicopters circled, firing tranquilizer missiles. Marcus leapt, impossibly high, grabbing the landing strut of one chopper. His weight pulled it sideways, rotors clipping a billboard. The entire aircraft spun and slammed into the side of a building, erupting in fire. Marcus dropped to the street below, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot. He wasn't simply an animal anymore. He was a monster. The hunt had begun, and Marcus was winning. Chapter 23, Trapped Underground. Thousands of citizens fled into the subway tunnels, believing they would be safer underground. Emergency crews tried directing them onto trains, but panic spread too fast. People screamed, pushed, and fought for space as alarms blared. A teenage boy, Evan, held his crying little sister close. "It'll be okay," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. A rumble shook the tunnel. Dust leaked from the ceiling. People screamed again. Then the impossible happened. The ceiling cracked open like eggshell. A massive hand burst through, ripping steel beams like paper. Marcus plunged down into the tunnel, roaring as debris rained around him. Chaos exploded. People ran in blind terror, sprinting along the tracks. Marcus roared again and smashed his fists into a subway train, flattening the metal like a soda can. The lights went out. The tunnel turned pitch black. Screams filled the darkness. Evan clung to his sister. They could feel Marcus moving through the dark tunnel, heavy steps, one after another shaking the rails. Then gunfire erupted above. Soldiers had followed him and were blasting downward through the torn ceiling. Marcus roared and climbed back up, shaking the tunnel again. Then silence. Evan dared to open his eyes. They were still alive, but trapped underground with no power, no exit, and the monster still somewhere above. Chapter 24, The Scientist Returns. While the city burned, Dr. Caldwell was driven through military checkpoints to the command bunker. She had been the head researcher at the zoo, a biologist who had studied Marcus's rapid intelligence growth. And she knew what nobody else did. Marcus wasn't born like this. He was created. In the bunker, the mayor glared at her. "Doctor, you knew what that gorilla was capable of." "I tried to warn the board," she said. "They refused to listen." "What is Marcus?" the general demanded. "Exactly." She sighed. "We wanted to study accelerated neural development. Marcus was part of a gene therapy trial. It was just supposed to increase cognitive ability, but his body evolved far faster than predicted. Muscle fibers, bone density, everything grew exponentially." "You made a weapon," the general snapped. "No," she shot back. "We made a mistake." The bunker shook, another explosion somewhere overhead. "Can he be stopped?" the general demanded. Dr. Caldwell closed her eyes. "Yes, but not how you're thinking." They stared at her. "He's not just rampaging. He's trying to go somewhere. If we can figure out where, maybe we can end this without leveling Manhattan." The mayor leaned forward. "Then let's find out what he wants, before the whole city becomes a graveyard." Chapter 25. The final migration begins. Marcus emerged from another shattered building, breathing heavily, muscles dripping with blood and sweat. Helicopters swarmed again, but he didn't even look at them anymore. He had a destination. Across the skyline, he could see Central Park, the only enormous piece of open land in the entire city. Trees, space, earth. Something primitive inside him pulled him toward it. Through the flames and gunfire, he pushed forward, knocking aside military trucks like toys. The city's final stand was forming there. Artillery was being set up. Dozens of tanks, more helicopters, snipers on rooftops, everything the city had left. Marcus stopped for a moment, breathing in the cold night air. His huge hands touched the ground. He wasn't roaring now. He almost looked tired, hurt, but determined. Then he stood up again and charged towards Central Park. The final battle was about to begin. Chapter 26. The park is fortified. Central Park had been transformed into a war zone. Sandbag walls were stacked around the great lawn. Artillery teams set up cannons on baseball fields. Snipers took position in trees and on roof edges of surrounding buildings. Humvees rolled in through closed roads, soldiers sprinting to their final defensive points. The park, usually full of runners, picnics, laughter, was now silent and waiting. And then the ground trembled. Soldiers gripped their rifles. A tank turret rotated toward the trees. Helicopter spotlights swept the sky. A massive shadow moved at the park's southern edge. Marcus stepped into view, massive, bleeding, furious, and unstoppable. "Hold fire," someone shouted. Marcus paused, scanning the huge open green space ahead of him. For a moment, everyone wondered. Was he calming down? Then a terrified private panicked and fired a single rifle shot. That single shot shattered the silence. Like a signal flare, every gun in the park opened fire at once. Chapter 27. The bloodiest clash. Artillery shells blasted into Marcus's path, throwing dirt and shrapnel into the sky. Machine guns screamed from armored trucks. Snipers fired volleys from the buildings surrounding the park. Marcus roared and charged. A tank fired, Marcus leapt, landing on the barrel, crushing it inward. He punched through the tank's armor and ripped the turret completely off, throwing it into a group of soldiers like a meteor. Helicopters dropped tranquilizer missiles, but Marcus swatted one out of the sky, the explosion lighting up the treetops. Another helicopter swooped low and managed to fire a net launcher, thick titanium cords wrapped around the gorilla's torso. For a moment, it looked like they had him. Marcus growled, muscles bulging. The cables snapped like sewing thread. He grabbed a Humvee and hurled it into a sandbag fortress, sending soldiers flying. The park was turning into a slaughterhouse. Smoke, screams, gunfire, and over it all, the enraged bellows of the wounded giant gorilla. No one was winning. Humanity was simply surviving, second to second. Chapter 28. Caldwell finds the truth. Far from the gunfire, Dr. Caldwell raced with a small security escort into an old maintenance building used for underground utilities. She had followed maps, tracking Marcus's projected path. He had been moving in a direct line toward one particular point. Not the park in general. A spot beneath it. She and her two guards forced open a rusted service hatch and descended into the old tunnel system below the park. The air was damp, thick, and cold. Pipes lined the walls like skeleton ribs. Caldwell followed the map deeper until she stopped in front of a sealed steel panel on the wall. A logo was printed on it. Biogen Research, Off-Site Facility 1987. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just a natural place Marcus was going. This was where the original genetic experiments began, decades before the zoo ever tried harmless intelligence research. Marcus wasn't going home. He was going to destroy the place that made him. Chapter 29, The Truth Comes Out. Dr. Caldwell broke through the panel, revealing an old research room frozen in time. Rotting computers, dusty lab coats, and cracked specimen containers lined the space. A single journal lay on a desk, its pages yellowed. She opened it. The words chilled her. Subject G1 displayed rapid neural development, increased aggression, recommendation, facility shut down before breach risk becomes uncontrollable. Below that, order received, bury the project, lock the tunnels, destroy all evidence. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Marcus wasn't the first. He was just the one who escaped. Above them, the whole building shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Gunfire echoed through the old pipes. Marcus was almost here. And she understood the horrible truth. Marcus wasn't killing out of blind rage. He was punishing the world that made him and tried to bury him alive. "We did this," she whispered. One of the soldiers turned to her. "Doc, how do we stop him?" Caldwell shut her eyes. "We can't stop him with bullets." Chapter 30, The Last Stand. Marcus burst through the ceiling of the old research room like an earthquake given form. Concrete exploded, pipes tore loose, dust engulfed the chamber. Soldiers raised their rifles, but Caldwell shouted, "Stop!" Marcus froze, staring at her through the thick settling dust. His chest heaved, his massive body dripped blood. He could crush all of them with a gesture. Caldwell stepped forward. "No guns," she whispered. "Not anymore." Marcus stared at her, rage, pain, and a deep, terrible intelligence burning behind his eyes. She pointed around the room. "This place created you. We deserved your fury, but the people out there, most of them had nothing to do with this." Marcus lowered his head, almost as if listening. Caldwell swallowed. "You're not a monster. You're a victim. But if you keep going, the world will only remember you as a nightmare." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Gunfire still rang from above. Explosions, screams. New York was on the brink of being destroyed by its own attempt to destroy Marcus. Then Marcus looked up through the broken ceiling. Toward daylight, a final helicopter was hovering, lining up a missile shot. The gunner steadied the targeting reticle. Caldwell screamed, "No!" Marcus pushed her aside and stood tall, shoulders squared, facing the incoming missile head-on. The explosion shook the entire underground. The shockwave threw Caldwell and the soldiers to the floor. Concrete collapsed, metal beams fell, lights burst. Smoke swallowed everything. When Caldwell opened her eyes, the chamber was filled with dust. Marcus lay motionless in the rubble, silent and still. Dead. The monster was gone. Or the victim finally free. The military sealed the tunnels. News reports rolled in. The world spun on. New York City would rebuild. But those who survived would never forget. They weren't attacked by a beast. They were judged by something their own world created. And pushed too far. The end. The night society broke. Chapter 1, The Breaking Point. Nobody was surprised when society finally collapsed. It had been coming for years, decades even. Corruption in government, corporations owning everything, unpayable rents, food shortages, rolling blackouts, and endless riots. But the moment it truly snapped was a Thursday evening in late September. The president went live on every broadcast station, her face drained and shaking. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "This is an emergency address," she said. "The United States can no longer maintain law and order at a federal level. Essential services have collapsed. Police response is at 28% capacity nationwide. It is no longer possible to guarantee public safety. Cities everywhere buzzed with tension. People watched from living rooms, bars, shelters, and street corners. Then she spoke the words that froze the nation. Effective immediately, all restraint of force is suspended. For 12 hours, no acts of violence, murder, theft, or destruction will be prosecuted. Survive as best you can. May God help us all. Then the broadcast cut. No anthem, no seal, no apology. Just static. Across the country, lights went off. Gunshots echoed, and someone somewhere laughed far too loudly. The first purge had begun. Chapter 2, The Countdown. In a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, 17-year-old Elias Turner stared at the dead broadcast screen. His mother stood behind him, one hand over her mouth, whispering, "No, they can't. They can't just abandon us." Elias swallowed. They just did. His little sister Mia was only 11, and she didn't fully understand, but she could feel the fear. She grabbed Elias' arm and whispered, "Are we gonna die?" "No," he lied. "We'll be okay." Their building already echoed with chaos. Doors slammed, feet pounded. People yelled as they ran to fortify their apartments or escape the neighborhood entirely. Everyone had known it might come to this. For months, the streets outside had been filled with violent protests and desperation. Stores looted daily, ambulances that never arrived, police overwhelmed, underpaid, and quitting in waves. Now for one night, there would be no laws at all. Their father had died a year earlier, leaving Elias the man of the house. He locked the apartment door, then dragged the old refrigerator across the entrance. "We're staying put," he said. "Nobody goes outside for any reason." His mother's eyes were glossy. "You think the door will stop them?" "No," Elias said under his breath, "but it might slow them down." From the street outside came the first scream of the night, long, sharp, and blood-curdling. Mia burst into tears. Elias knew then. The real nightmare had only just begun. Chapter 3, The First Kill. 2 floors below lived Mr. Hansen, a retired veteran in his 70s. Most in the building liked him. He was quiet, respectful, and always helped carry groceries upstairs when elevators went out. Now he stood alone in his apartment, loading a shotgun with trembling hands. For years he had watched society crumble around him. He had seen people stabbed outside the grocery store, seen gangs walk openly with rifles where school buses once rolled, seen police shrug and tell victims, "There's nothing we can do." Tonight was different. Tonight, he didn't have to wait to become a victim. A crash echoed in the hallway outside, neighbors arguing, one demanding payment for old debts. Hansen sat in his recliner, breathing hard. His hands shook, not from fear, from anticipation. Someone pounded on his door. "Etienne, you still got food, old man, I know you do." He recognized the voice, Tommy Wilson, a 20-year-old dropout who lived across the hall. Always high, always broke, always threatening someone. Hansen stood and cocked his shotgun. The door burst inward. Tommy rushed inside, bat raised. Boom! Tommy slammed into the wall, chest torn open. Silence. Hansen stared at the body as blood soaked his carpet. For the first time in years, he felt safe. He sat back in his chair, shotgun across his knees. The purge had changed something in people. They had all lived too long in fear. Now fear had switched sides. Chapter 4, The City Wakes Up. By 8:30 p.m., New York was unrecognizable. Cars burned at intersections. Gunshots echoed across the blocks. Looters sprinted through shattered storefronts with TVs and canned food. Stray dogs howled, terrified. The streetlights flickered and died. With the police no longer responding, criminals rose like wolves tasting blood for the first time. A violent crew known as the Midtown Harvesters drove stolen police cruisers through Manhattan, dragging people into vans and screaming with laughter. Social media live streams showed them executing people on sidewalks while viewers typed, "No more rules. Let the weak burn. This is what THEY deserve." Elsewhere, suburban families sat in pitch-black basements, guns pointed at locked doors, praying the violence wouldn't reach them. But it would. No street was safe. No building was sacred. No person was beyond reach. Society had needed order to survive. Without it, everyone showed their true selves. Some people hid. Some people hunted. Some people snapped instantly, like they had been waiting their whole lives for this freedom. Because for 12 hours, the law was not gone. The law was dead, and the world was celebrating the funeral. Chapter 5, The Call for Blood. Elias peered out the window of their dark apartment. Down on the street, dozens of people moved like scavengers. Someone smashed the pharmacy window, grabbing whatever wasn't nailed down. 5 others fought over a gas-filled generator until one stabbed another in the neck. A group of masked men with bats marched down the block, laughing. One had a homemade flamethrower. Another dragged a teenage girl by the hair. Elias jerked away from the window, heart pounding. His mother spoke softly. "What did you see?" "Nothing you need to worry about." Then the building's fire alarm began to scream. Someone had set the lobby on fire. His mother gasped, "Elias, the smoke." He grabbed his sister and ushered them into the back room, sealing the space under the door with towels. Smoke rolled through the hallway as footsteps echoed outside. People were raiding the apartments. Someone pounded on the door. Then a voice Elias recognized, a neighbor drunk slurring. "Open UP, Turner. I know you've got food in there." His sister whimpered. Elias gripped the kitchen knife he'd armed himself with. No more pretending. No more waiting for rescue. Tonight he had to fight or they would die. Chapter 6, Smoke and Steel. The pounding on the apartment door grew harder, faster, more desperate. Elias' neighbor, Mr. Crenshaw, usually a quiet man who watered plants and smiled politely in the hallway, was now screaming like a starving animal. "I know you got food, Elias. Open the door." He slammed something heavy against the wood. The frame cracked. Mia hid behind Elias' mother, sobbing silently. Elias' grip tightened on the kitchen knife. His hands were slick with sweat, but his jaw was locked. If Crenshaw got inside, they were dead. This wasn't a neighbor anymore. This was a predator. Another smash. The lock snapped. The door buckled inward and Crenshaw stumbled in, eyes bloodshot, a crowbar raised high. His clothes were soaked in sweat and smoke, his hair wild, his face twisted with panic and hunger. "There's no food left out there," he muttered. "I have kids, I have to feed them, I have to." He lunged. Elias didn't think, he reacted. He ducked under the crowbar swing and drove the knife upward. It sunk into Crenshaw's stomach. The man gasped, eyes going wide. His crowbar clattered to the floor. He fell backward, hitting the wall before sliding down, leaving a dark streak behind him. His voice trembled. I just wanted to survive." Elias looked down at the knife in his hand, red, dripping. He had just killed a man. Crenshaw's eyes faded, and the hallway outside filled with more footsteps, others searching the floors. "We need to leave," Elias whispered, because this building was no longer shelter. It was a slaughterhouse. Chapter 7, Escape Through Fire. The apartment was rapidly filling with smoke. The fire from the lobby was climbing the stairwell, oxygen feeding it like a beast. Doors were breaking on other floors. Screams echoed like the soundtrack of hell. Elias grabbed backpacks and stuffed what they could carry. Bottled water, canned food, inhalers, a flashlight, spare batteries. His mother wrapped Mia's face with a wet cloth. "We're going out through the fire escape," Elias said. They opened the window. Heat from the rising flames below pulsed upward. Smoke stung their eyes. The metal fire escape ladder rattled as they stepped onto it. "Slow and quiet," Elias whispered. But once they were halfway down the side of the building, a window 2 floors below smashed open. A masked man leaned out, clutching a pistol. He shouted, "Move and I shoot." Elias shielded his sister. Then, a deafening gunshot cracked the air. Glass shattered behind them. The bullet had missed, barely. The masked man cocked the gun again, taking aim. Then the building beneath him exploded outward, embers bursting through the wall. The man screamed as flames engulfed the window frame. He disappeared into the burning apartment. Elias, his mother, and Mia scrambled down the metal ladder and dropped into the alley just as glass rained onto the pavement. They had escaped the building, but not the purge. Chapter 8: Streets of Wolves. The alley behind the apartment was dim lit by burning storefronts and overturned cars. A distant explosion shook dust off the fire escape. Elias took his sister's hand and led them toward the main street. What they walked into was worse than the news had ever shown. Bodies lay in the street, some fresh, some still twitching. A group of masked men dragged someone behind a van. Another man sat on the sidewalk, laughing as he smashed an ATM open with a hammer. Stray dogs ripped at food spilled from a toppled delivery truck. A woman in torn clothes screamed for help as 3 men chased her into an alley, the door slamming shut behind them. Mia buried her face into Elias' arm, trembling. People had turned into animals in less than 2 hours. Elias' mother whispered, "We need to find someplace safe." Safe? There was no such place anymore. Gunshots cracked from a nearby intersection. Elias crouched and peeked around a burned taxi. A mob was moving together down the street, dozens strong, armed with pipes, machetes, baseball bats, and firearms. They carried torches and spray-painted symbols on walls. They chanted, "No God, no law, no CHAINS." One of them held a megaphone and shouted, "Tonight, society kneels before the people it abandoned." These weren't random rioters. This was an organized movement, and they were coming straight down the street. Elias grabbed his family, and they ducked into the nearest unlocked door. They didn't have a plan. They only had instinct. Hide or die. Chapter 9: The Basement. The door led into an abandoned deli. Shelves were overturned, food coolers looted, cash registers smashed open. The air smelled of metal and stale beer. Elias spotted a trapdoor behind the counter. "A basement," he whispered. "Come on." They slipped through the trapdoor and shut it above them. The basement was small, filled with crates, old freezer parts, and moldy wallpaper peeling off damp concrete. Mia sat on a pallet in the corner while Elias pushed a shelf against the trapdoor. Through the tiny cracks they heard the mob marching past above, boots thudding, glass crunching, voices chanting louder. "No God, no law, no CHAINS." They waited in breathless silence until the last voices faded. Mia finally whispered, "Elias, when will this be over?" He swallowed. "When the sun comes up." But he wasn't sure, not anymore. Even if the government reinstated law, how many would follow it again after this? His mother stared at the floor, hollow-eyed. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "Someone will check the building eventually." Elias agreed. But before he could speak further, something creaked behind them. They turned. A figure sat in the shadowed corner of the basement, someone they hadn't seen before. A homeless man, thin as a skeleton wrapped in rags, eyes wide and shining. He grinned with cracked lips. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. Chapter 10: The Collector. Elias jumped backward, knife in hand. Don't come closer. The man didn't move. He sat against a rusted furnace, smiling like he was enjoying the moment. You heard them outside, didn't you? The man whispered. The purge isn't just a night, it's a release. People have been holding in their rage for years. Now the chains are off, finally off. Elia's mother stepped back protectively. Why are you here? She asked. The man giggled. Because I knew this day was coming. They all did. The government, the rich, the banks, they knew people would snap, so they let it happen. He leaned forward, eyes unblinking. Do you know what happens when people get power overnight? They don't give it back. He tapped his chest. I've been down here for months listening to the building crack and rot. Everyone above was pretending society still worked. I stopped pretending a long time ago. Elias didn't trust him. Just let us leave, he said. But the man's smile changed, thin, sharper. Leave? No. If you leave, you won't last 10 minutes out there. He stood slowly. Down here, I can protect you. Elias froze. The man wasn't offering safety. He was offering ownership. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've survived this city by knowing how to collect things, food, supplies, and people. Elias felt his heart turn to ice. This wasn't a shelter. This was a trap. And now they were inside it. Chapter 11, The Basement Turns. Elias stepped in front of Mia and raised his knife. His grip shook, but his eyes stayed locked on the homeless man. You're not collecting us, Elias said. The man's grin spread wider. Oh, you don't understand. I'm not keeping you because I want to. He walked toward a workbench, dragging one leg behind him like a broken puppet. He opened a drawer and pulled out a dented meat cleaver. I'm keeping you because the streets are hungry, and hungry things take what they want. Down here, I'm the one who decides who dies. Elias backed away, heart pounding. Mia whimpered. His mother stepped beside him, breathing fast. The man licked his cracked lips. Don't make this difficult. He lunged. Elias shoved his mother and sister aside and swung the knife. The blade grazed the man's arm, but he didn't even flinch. He grabbed Elias' wrist with shocking strength and slammed him against the furnace. Elias dropped the knife. The cleaver rose into the air. A glass bottle smashed across the man's skull. Elias' mother stood behind him, the broken bottle still in her hand. The man's eyes went wide. Then he collapsed onto the concrete, bleeding heavily. Silence. Mia ran to Elias and hugged him, trembling. They had survived again. But the clock was still ticking, and the night wasn't over. Chapter 12, The City Goes Mad. They climbed back up from the basement, leaving the man unconscious, or worse, behind. Elias blocked the trapdoor with a shelf and directed them toward the back exit of the deli. Outside, the city had become a battlefield. An apartment complex across the street burned like a funeral pyre. Cars exploded in the distance. People ran screaming in every direction, some fleeing, some chasing, some laughing while they attacked strangers in the open. A massive group marched down the avenue in black jumpsuits and helmets, carrying batons and riot shields stolen from abandoned precincts. They grabbed anyone they found, dragging them into armored trucks. Human cages. Someone had taken the collapse of society as permission to become government themselves. A woman burst from a pawn shop and was immediately jumped by 3 men. She didn't scream anymore. People had run out of shock. Elias pulled his mother and sister into a narrow alley. We need someplace fortified, he said. His mother pointed toward the river. Roosevelt Hospital, 3 blocks from here. It'll be packed, Elias said, or taken. She met his eyes. And this street won't be safe much longer. She was right. They started moving. Chapter 13, The Tunnels Below. The sidewalks were death traps, so they moved through alleys, keeping low and in the shadows. The city was alive with violence, like every suppressed rage in every person had been released at once. They found an entrance to a subway stairwell. No trains were running, but tunnels were better than open streets. They descended into the underground. The lights flickered, then went dark entirely. They clicked on a flashlight and stepped into the abandoned station. The silence was worse than the chaos above. A faint metallic drip echoed through the tunnels. The air smelled like rust, mold, and old electricity. Posters on the walls showed smiling faces from a world that no longer existed. As they walked down the platform, they began hearing something. Breathing. Not theirs. Slow, wet breathing. Elia's motioned for silence. They crouched behind a bench. On the far end of the station, a man sat against the wall. His body was soaked with blood. His shirt was torn into ribbons. His eyes stared blankly ahead, lips quivering. Elia stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked up slowly. His voice came out torn and hollow. They took her. They took everyone." Elia's mother kneeled next to him. "Who?" He shuddered with rage. "The ones in the masks, the ones with the trucks, they're collecting survivors, not to save them." He coughed blood into his hand. "But to cleanse the city, they say the purge isn't enough. They want total reset." Elia's face went cold. "So they're killing everyone?" The man shook his head. "No, they're taking them someplace first." "What?" Elias asked. "Where?" The man's hand trembled as he pointed deeper into the tunnels. They set up camp under the city, old maintenance lines, hundreds of people in cages. He slumped forward. "Dead." Mia grabbed Elias' arm. "We need to leave." But the whisper of footsteps echoed behind them. They were no longer alone. Chapter 14, The Hunters. Flashlights flickered from the tunnel entrance they had come through. Heavy footfalls followed, measured, organized. No panicked steps. These were soldiers. Or hunters. Elias grabbed his mom and sister, pulling them behind a maintenance door. They slipped into a narrow corridor as the hunters entered the station. 3 men wearing patched riot armor marked with spray-painted symbols. Their helmets were reinforced with steel plating. One carried a shotgun, the other a rifle, and the third a cattle prod. One spoke with cold precision. "Group 4, check South Tunnel. We need 20 more before 3 a.m. Footsteps spread out. Beams of light scanned the platform. Elias led his family deeper into the maintenance hall. Pipes ran overhead. Rats scattered along the floor. The smell of chemical runoff burned their noses. Mia whispered, "What do they want with the people?" Elias answered bitterly, "Something worse than killing." They kept moving. Then they heard screaming ahead. Someone was already being dragged through the tunnels, begging, kicking, crying for help. Elias and his family hid behind a row of service lockers as 2 hunters wrestled a young woman down the tracks. She clawed at the floor. "Please, I did nothing." The shotgun guard laughed. "Nobody did anything, that's the point." The woman was dragged into the darkness, her screams fading until they were swallowed by the tunnels. Elias' mother looked at him. "We can't help her, we have to stay alive." But Elias felt something twisting in his chest. He had killed tonight. He had survived tonight. But if nobody pushed back, nobody would survive tomorrow. He whispered, "There has to be somewhere safe." And then finally they saw it. Light ahead. A security checkpoint, abandoned but intact, leading into a maintenance control office. A heavy door. Thick walls. Barricadable. Shelter. They rushed inside. Chapter 15, The Shelter. The control room was small, barely larger than a storage closet, filled with dusty monitors, old filing cabinets, and a radio system that no longer had power. But the door was steel and had a deadbolt. They locked it behind them. Only then did everyone let out a breath they'd been holding for hours. Mia fell asleep instantly against the wall, exhaustion overtaking terror. Elia's mother sat on a crate, burying her face in her hands. Elia stood at the cracked window, watching the tunnel outside. Hunters marched past occasionally, dragging more people farther into the underground. How many had they taken? How many would live till dawn? His mother finally spoke, voice numb. This didn't happen in one night. It was building, and nobody stopped it. The government didn't fix it. People didn't demand better. Everyone ignored the cracks until we fell through them. Elias nodded. The purge didn't break society. He looked out at the hollow tunnels, the darkness swallowing screams. Society breaking caused the purge. He clenched his fists, and he realized something awful. Surviving wasn't enough. If they didn't escape this city, if they didn't fight back, then they were already dead. Chapter 16, The Hunger of the Streets. By the second week of the purge, New York no longer resembled a city. The skyline was still there, but everything below the 20th floors of the high-rises had turned into battlegrounds. Burned cars blocked intersections. Skulls stuck on rusted metal rebar decorated alley corners, and the smell old blood, burnt plastic, corpses never left the air. People had begun to form food gangs. Supermarkets, restaurants, warehouses, anywhere with edible supplies were now fortified strongholds. The hunger wolves ran the Lower East Side and wore boiler suits splattered with grease and blood. They had turned a Costco into a small kingdom. At night, families hid quietly in apartments, eating bugs, stale crackers, anything that wouldn't get them killed for possessing. People were no longer just afraid of being murdered. They were afraid of being eaten. Everyone assumed that those who disappeared were killed quickly. But the wolves didn't kill quickly. One man, Robert Sanderson, had been hanging in their basement freezer for 3 days. He was still alive when they carved into him, bit by bit, so they could keep the meat fresh longer. He had screamed himself unconscious more than once. The Omega broadcast network talked about humanity changing forever, about how the weak were never meant to survive. Some had begun to believe it. Others prayed the government would intervene. They were wrong. There was no government anymore. Only predators and prey. Chapter 17, The Broadcast That Shook the Nation. At 3:33 a.m., every working television, smartphone, radio, and billboard suddenly flickered on. Even devices that had been turned off forced themselves awake. A video began to play. A masked man sat in a chair, wearing a pristine white suit splattered with crimson fingerprints. Behind him stood 4 armed guards, their outfits made of stitched leather from what looked like human skin. The masked man spoke calmly. "People of America, you were not abandoned. This was the plan." He leaned forward, tapping his fingers on a polished black table. "You failed as a society. The rich fed off the poor. The powerful stepped on the weak. This has always been true. We have simply removed the illusion of safety." Images flashed. Riots, supermarket executions, families hiding under staircases, buildings burning. The masked man continued. "Only the strongest, smartest, and most capable will survive our new world. We will rebuild with those who prove themselves worthy." Then he lifted a gun to his own temple. "Even I am not exempt." Bang! Blood sprayed the white suit. The body slumped. The screen went dark. People across the country screamed, sobbed, stared in shock. But 10 seconds later, the same masked man returned, sitting upright again as if nothing had happened. "It is an honor to die for the future." He fired again and again. The camera cut away from the death each time, but the message was clear. He had recorded several versions in advance. He knew what would happen. And this was only the beginning. The broadcast ended with a single phrase appearing on every screen. The purge is permanent. Chapter 18, The Children Who Fought Back. While adults killed each other in the streets, a strange phenomenon began spreading through the suburbs and upper floors of the cities. Children were surviving on their own. Quietly, organized, hidden, they formed small micro-societies, sealing off schools, attics, daycares, and community centers. At first they were terrified, but after the first week, something changed. They realized adults were the threat. A group of 12 kids had fortified PS 49 Elementary School in Queens. Their leader was a 12-year-old girl named Harper Sloan. She had been a Boy Scout, an honor student, and a quiet introvert before the world collapsed. Now she was a strategist. She taught the kids how to strip electrical wires to set traps, sharpen metal rulers into blades, and build silent alarms from old tablet speakers. Her rule was simple: no adults enter. One night, a group of 3 armed raiders tried breaking into the school for shelter, assuming the children were defenseless. They never made it past the first hallway. The kids attacked from the ceiling. Ropes around necks, glass shards stabbing downward. The children moved like ghosts, silent, precise, without mercy. In the morning, the bodies were dragged outside and displayed with a sign: KIDS only. The children had become something adults had forgotten how to be. United. Chapter 19, Blood Moon over Brooklyn. On the 23rd day of the purge, the sky turned red, not from sunset, but from the largest chemical fire Brooklyn had ever seen. A massive government warehouse storing industrial compounds had been blown apart during a gang firefight, and the smoke stained the moon scarlet. People called it the Blood Moon. Rumor spread like wildfire that the blood-red sky meant something supernatural had begun. And fear made people snap. A religious militia calling themselves God's 40 Voices began marching up Flatbush Avenue, wearing church robes and armed with stolen police rifles. They believed the blood moon was a sign that Judgment Day was here, and that they had been chosen to purify the sinners. Anyone not kneeling in prayer was executed on sight. They stormed apartment buildings floor by floor. Grandmothers, single fathers, teenagers, it didn't matter. Confess or bleed, they chanted as they dragged people from their beds. A young woman named Alessia managed to barricade herself in her bathroom while the voices searched her apartment. She heard her neighbor screaming next door as the executions began. She pressed her forehead to the tile and whispered, "Please, God." Then she remembered. These monsters believed they were speaking for God. The irony made her want to vomit. Footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. She held her breath. The doorknob began to turn. Then, a massive explosion shook the entire building. Someone had launched a homemade RPG from the rooftop across the street. Flaming debris fell through the hallway. The voices began screaming as the upper floors collapsed. Alessia didn't stay to see the aftermath. She climbed out the 3rd floor window and fled into the smoke. She had lost her home, her neighbors, and her safety, but she had gained something crucial: a reason to survive. Chapter 20, The Hidden Bunker. Outside the city, deep in the mountains of upstate New York, a hidden military bunker had awakened. It wasn't on any modern maps. It had no digital footprint. Only 7 high-ranking officials even knew it existed before society collapsed. Now only 3 remained alive. Inside, a skeleton crew monitored the purge across dozens of states. What they saw was worse than war. Entire communities had been wiped out. Civilian militias roaming freely. Cannibal tribes emerging in rural America. Police forces turning into death squads. Hospitals turning into butcheries. One soldier, Private Alicia Downs, stared at a screen showing live thermal scans of Manhattan. "There were 8 million people here before the collapse," she whispered. "Now, heat signatures show fewer than 1 million. Her commander nodded grimly. Then he spoke a sentence that chilled every person in the bunker. "The purge succeeded faster than projected." "What do you mean projected?" Alicia asked. The room fell silent. The commander sighed and opened a file stamped with a code name. Operation CLENSWEP. Alicia began reading, and her stomach twisted. This hadn't been a collapse. It hadn't been a terrorist attack. It hadn't even been an accident. The purge was a planned reset designed by world governments to eliminate 80% of the population in the name of planetary sustainability. Humanity wasn't dying. It was being harvested. And the part that terrified Alicia most. The next phase of the plan was scheduled to begin in 48 hours. And it made the purge look merciful. Chapter 21, The Underground City. Back in Manhattan, Elias, his mother, and Mia had escaped the hunters in the subway tunnels. They wandered deeper, using the old maintenance corridors as cover. At first, the tunnels seemed abandoned, but soon they found evidence of life. Small fires burning in steel barrels, scraps of food, makeshift tents. Then they heard voices. A group of survivors emerged from the shadows, adults, children, and teenagers. They had fortified an old service platform into a small living area. Wire mesh and metal panels blocked off the main corridor, and armed sentries kept watch. They had lights rigged from batteries and solar panels scavenged from the surface. "Who are you?" Elias asked cautiously. "We're the ones who refused to die," a young man answered, motioning to a group who looked as hardened as soldiers. "We live down here now. Up there," he pointed toward the street. "They're hunting the weak. The underground, this is the only safe place left." Elias felt a small relief, but only briefly. "How long have you been here?" 2 weeks, the man said, "and we've already lost half of us trying to scavenge for food." He looked at Elias' family. "If you want to stay, we have rules. Fight or you're out." Elias nodded, realizing that survival meant more than hiding. It meant adapting to the new world. Chapter 22, Blood on the Rails. The first time Elias ventured into the tunnels above ground, it was to scavenge food from a broken subway car. Mia and his mother stayed behind, hidden. He had a flashlight and a baseball bat, more for courage than defense. The scene he found was horrific. A group of purge gangs had ambushed another scavenger party. Bodies sprawled across the tracks, torn clothes and blood pooled into the grooves of the rails. The smell of death was thick. Rats scuttled over corpses, and the survivors' screams had long since stopped. Elias froze for a moment, then moved quickly, gathering what he could from abandoned bags and crates. A half-eaten sandwich, a bottle of water, a small box of first aid supplies, enough for now. When he returned to the underground community, the young man from earlier frowned. "You went out there. You could have been dead in seconds." "I had to," Elias said. "We need supplies." The man shook his head. "Out there, the purge isn't just the gangs. There are others, people worse than animals. Watch yourself." Chapter 23, The Cult Emerges. The purge wasn't uniform. Some people were thieves, some were murderers, and some had become cults. One of the most terrifying groups was known only as the Crimson Circle. They wore red robes and painted their faces in blood. Every night, they conducted public sacrifices, claiming that the city's suffering would cleanse the sins of the survivors. Elias watched from the tunnels one night as the Crimson Circle dragged a young man to the middle of an intersection. They tied him to a lamp post and carved symbols into his chest with a ceremonial knife. Cars piled up behind the ritual, abandoned in fear. A few people watched helplessly, unable to intervene. Elias' stomach turned. "Why do they do this?" he whispered to the young man who led the underground community. They call it redemption, the man said, voice hollow. We call it insanity. They're a reminder that humanity isn't just failing, it's dying. Chapter 24, Betrayal in the Shadows. In the underground tunnels, trust was fragile. Supplies were scarce, tempers flared, and fear made people desperate. One night, Elias overheard whispers from a corner of the safe house. Half the food stash goes to the Crimson Circle, one man hissed. If we give them enough, maybe they'll leave us alone. Elias felt a knot in his stomach. This wasn't survival, this was submission. He confronted the conspirators, but words meant little. They drew knives. A fight broke out. Blood sprayed the concrete floor. Screams echoed in the tunnels and gunfire rang from above. In the chaos, one man disappeared, thrown down a ventilation shaft. Another was slashed across the chest, coughing blood into the shadows. Elias realized something terrifying. Even underground, there was no safety. People weren't just predators, they were opportunists. Humanity's worst traits had followed them into the tunnels. He helped his mother and sister barricade the inner door. Tonight, they had survived, but at what cost? Every night, someone was killed or disappeared. The purge had become a constant, never-ending nightmare. Chapter 25, The First Rescue Attempt. After nearly 3 weeks, Elias knew they couldn't stay underground forever. The underground community was cramped, resources dwindling, and hope fading. He decided to organize a small rescue mission to retrieve supplies from an abandoned hospital on the surface. He gathered 3 volunteers, a teenager named Lena, a middle-aged man called Marcus, and himself. His mother insisted he take Mia along. They armed themselves with whatever they could find: bats, knives, a pistol scavenged from a fallen Purge gang member, and a small first aid kit. The hospital loomed ahead, its windows shattered and walls blackened from fire. Gunfire echoed in the distance. Elias signaled the group to move. Every step on the cracked pavement felt like a risk. Every shadow could hide a killer. Every scream from the streets reminded him the purge was still active, and the city above was no longer a place of homes. It was a battlefield where death waited in every alley. They reached the hospital's back entrance. "Stay close," Elias whispered, "and don't make a sound." They slipped inside, unaware that their every move was being watched by unseen eyes in the broken corridors. Someone, or something, was waiting for them. Chapter 26, The Hospital Trap. The abandoned hospital smelled of decay and chemicals. Bloodstains streaked the floor, and the walls were scorched from past fires. Elias led the group cautiously, flashlight flickering across overturned beds and shattered medical equipment. A faint shuffle echoed from the second floor. Everyone froze. "Probably rats," Marcus whispered. "Or worse," Lena muttered, gripping her bat tightly. They moved deeper. In the surgical wing, they found supplies, canned food, water, and a small cache of medical kits. Relief washed over them, until the doors slammed shut behind them. A voice echoed through the hall, calm but cold. "Looking for something." From the shadows emerged a man in a red robe, a member of the Crimson Circle. Behind him, dozens more appeared, faces painted, knives gleaming. "Please, we just need supplies," Elias begged. The man tilted his head. "This hospital isn't for scavengers. It's for the chosen. You're trespassing." The group backed away, realizing the purge wasn't just above ground. It had infiltrated every corner of the city. Escape seemed impossible. Chapter 27, The Fight for Survival. The Crimson Circle advanced slowly, chanting in low, guttural tones. Elias' group scrambled, using overturned hospital carts as cover. A fight broke out. Lena swung her bat, Marcus fired the pistol, but the circle was relentless. One by one, members closed in, their movements coordinated like a single organism. Elias grabbed Mia and ran through a side corridor, dodging bloodied hands that reached from every angle. Screams filled the hospital. The sound of splintering wood and metal echoed as the fight tore through the halls. They reached the stairwell, only to find it blocked by more robed figures. "We're trapped," Elias whispered, panic rising. From above came a crash. Someone had thrown a fire extinguisher from the third floor, knocking several circle members unconscious. It was a small victory, but fleeting. They needed a plan, and fast. Chapter 28, Descent into Madness. Elias led his family and the remaining volunteers down into the hospital's basement. Hopping the maintenance tunnels would offer a way out. The basement was a maze of water-drenched corridors, broken pipes, and the stench of death. As they moved, they stumbled upon remnants of past victims, bloody clothing, shattered limbs, makeshift cages. The Crimson Circle wasn't just killing, they were harvesting survivors for something darker. A distant scream echoed through the tunnels. Mia clung to Elias, shaking. "They're taking people," she whispered. Elias nodded grimly. "We have to keep moving. One way out, the river." Every step felt like a descent into hell. Shadows moved in corners, strange whispers filled the air, and the walls seemed to close in. For the first time, Elias understood the true scope of the purge. It wasn't just a night of chaos. It was an engineered nightmare, designed to crush humanity completely. Chapter 29, The River Crossing. Finally, they reached an underground path leading to the East River. Outside, the moon was obscured by smoke and flames, turning the sky a sickly orange. They climbed a rusted ladder to the riverbank, only to find armed purge gangs patrolling the waterfront. Boats were stolen, makeshift rafts guarded, and anyone attempting escape risked being shot. Elias scanned the area. A partially submerged rowboat rested against a dock unnoticed. He signaled the group. Quietly, they moved toward it, hearts pounding. A gunshot cracked. The group froze. A man from the gang had spotted them. "Go," Elias shouted. They sprinted the last few feet, diving into the water. The boat rocked dangerously as bullets splashed around them. Marcus pulled the oars with all his strength. Behind them, the chaos of New York raged, the purge continuing unchecked, screaming, fire, and death everywhere. They had survived the city, but the nightmare wasn't over. Chapter 30, The Dawn of Nothing. As dawn broke, the group floated silently down the river, exhausted, wounded, and terrified. Smoke still covered much of the skyline, and the city's roar of chaos had not diminished. Elias looked at Mia, her small hand in his. "We made it," he whispered. But the truth was bitter. Around them, the water carried the bodies of those who had not survived. Behind them, New York was unrecognizable, a ruined city where only the ruthless, cunning, and merciless would continue. His mother spoke softly. "Do you think anyone will come back?" Elias shook his head. "No, the purge, it doesn't end. Not really. They've broken everything. They've broken us." The river carried them away from the city, but the memories of screams, blood, fire, and madness would never leave. Above them, the sun rose through the smoke, a pale, sickly light. Humanity had failed itself, and there was no redemption. Only survival. And even that was uncertain. The end.